I made a Minnie Mouse Ears headband cake for my friend's birthday. This is how it turned out. I'm going to show that process in this video, and if you enjoy it, please don't forget to like and subscribe the video. So this is my inspiration for this cake. It's going to be like the Minnie Mouse Ears hairband. It's for a friend who's just back from Disneyland and it's her birthday. So I'm going to make it like this. So I'm going to have two 5-inch cakes for the ears, and then I'm going to stack it up with smaller, I think they're about, I'll measure them, smaller cakes, and carve them into the shape of the bow, put them on top, and then probably just use some sugar paste for this hairband. Okay. So I'm starting off with some white chocolate ganache, and I'm using this to secure the cake to the cake board. This is a baby pink masonite 14-inch board, and I've got the 5-inch cakes on top of it, and these will be the Minnie Mouse ears. So those would be the black ears that will be in the background behind the bow when we're finished. What I'm doing here is I'm adding some lovely vanilla buttercream, and I'm having to put on a layer to begin with, and then a thicker layer on top once the sort of crumb coat is done. And then I'm just putting another layer of 5-inch red velvet cake on top. And then I've got two 3.5-inch red velvet cakes. So I did measure them in the end, and they are 3.5 inches. And I'm just cutting the tops off of them so they're both the exact same size and they're both level. Next, what I'm doing is I'm going to make the little bridge between the two 5-inch cakes, and this will be sort of the hairband piece. And I decided the best way to go about that was to make some cake pop mix for this. So I've just took some of the offcuts of the red velvet cake and I've mixed it with the vanilla buttercream, and it makes a sort of sticky mix that you can then mould to whichever shape you like. And I'm just going to mould it into place, connecting the two ears in the middle there, and that is the sort of middle part of the hairband. And the reason I felt this was important was because the bow sort of comes from the middle in between the two ears, and it needed something to hold it for support. I felt if I had put the bow in the middle, it would be a little bit fragile, and I didn't want it to collapse, especially with these being gluten-free and a little bit more delicate. So I've got my 3.5-inch rounds here, and I'm cutting them into the shape of Minnie's bow. So sort of like a heart shape. I've put them up against the ears just to get the right size, and then I've cut a slope from the outside in, so it's sloping down towards the middle of the hairband. And then I've placed the first one on top, and I'm just doing the exact same thing with the other one. So cut it into a sort of heart shape, and then I'm rounding all the edges, and trying to make them both look as similar as possible. What you will notice later on is one of them's a little higher than the other, but I'll show you how I fix that. So I'm securing the 3.5-inch bow shaped cakes to the ears with more buttercream, and then I'm just carving a little bit more shape into the bows here, just to make sure they've got a nice 3D shape and it doesn't look too boxy. So next up, I'm just adding this white chocolate ganache. This is where it got really challenging. As I said earlier, the red velvet gluten-free cake is very delicate. So the white chocolate ganache, when it comes to applying it, it just wants to pull the crumb away from the cake. So it's important that the ganache is soft. It can't be too thick or too cool. So I made sure to put it in the microwave and heat it so that the consistency was really soft and spreadable. And then I just really took my time. Obviously this video is really sped up, but this process did take quite a bit of time, and I did have to go really slowly and just make sure that I was gently applying the ganache around the cake, covering all of the cake without tearing the cake off. So here's an example of just how slowly I was working and just how difficult it was. So I had to reheat that ganache again and get it a little bit softer. And as you can see here, I'm having to work really slowly, but we did get there in the end. So I did a sort of crumb coat first. So just really painstakingly applying it, just trying everything that I can not to crumble that bow into a million pieces. And what I found was if I added larger lumps of the ganache on and just sort of smeared it slowly, then I could cover as much of it as I could, and then I just wanted to get it into the fridge so that the ganache that was on there would set firmer, and then I would be able to work with it a lot easier. So as you can see here, I've almost covered all of the cake with the ganache. It does look really messy, but I'm going to put it in the fridge and let it harden just a little bit, and then it'll be so much easier to work with. I'm also moulding it a little bit with that cling film on top there. So it's now been in the fridge. It's much harder, and as you can see, I can actually sort of shave pieces of that chocolate away with my knife. So I'm taking this opportunity now to carve in some shape where I didn't previously have it. So I'm making sure that the ears and the bows are distinctive. They're two pieces. I don't want it to look like one piece. I want it to look like ears wearing a bow, if that makes sense. I don't want it to just look like they're just lumped together basically. So I'm just carving out areas where there would be gaps and shadows. And then I'm shaving away chocolate in the middle there where the bow would be tied. And now I'm going over that original crumb coat with a thicker layer of the white chocolate ganache, and it's so much easier to work with now that everything's a bit cold and much firmer. But the cake inside has all been completely covered, so it's no longer fragile, but it's still going to be very fresh and it's not going to dry out. So yeah, just going over the whole cake and covering the whole thing with a nice thick layer, because the other thing is the white chocolate ganache is really delicious, so I don't want to skimp on that either. I want a nice even coating over the whole cake. So now I'm just going over my first coat of chocolate ganache with my flexi smoother. So this is the Squire's Kitchen Flexi Smoother, and the idea is that you can bend it into the different shapes of your cake, so it's a lot easier to tidy up all those rough edges than using your palette knife. So I'm just giving you a bit of a closer look here, and I don't know if it's as easy to see, but one side of the bow is a lot higher than the other. So now I'm going to try and fix that with some white chocolate ganache. So I'm doing this by building the layers of chocolate ganache slowly. So I've got my first layer that has now set hard and gone cold in the fridge, and that allows me to add another layer knowing that the cake underneath is nice and stable and I'm not going to compromise any of that. So that's the best way to do it if you're trying to create a shape using ganache. Just let one layer set before you add more, because otherwise you won't get the shape you're looking for. So I'm going back over again with the Flexi Smoother. Now that I've added some more soft ganache, I'm smoothing that out and tidying it up again with this Flexi Smoother just to get the right shape. Obviously adding more chocolate gives it a more rough finish again, so I'm having to take my time here. As I'm adding, I'm pulling it across, trying to keep everything where it was whilst smoothing the softer layer on top. It's kind of like if you were using clay, or like how a plasterer might work. You're trying to smooth over a certain area without pulling off what's already been put on. So now I'm adding detail to the centrepiece here, I'm pressing down on the ganache right in the middle to create a dent where the fabric would be looping around the bow, and I'm defining the edges of that centre piece on either side. And then I'm going to go around once I'm happy with the ganache coating, and I'm just rubbing with some wet hands around the whole cake so that when the sugar paste is added it has something to stick to. And then just defining all those edges with my Dresden tool before I cover the whole thing with sugar paste. So I've got some black sugar paste here and I'm just rolling it out, and I want this piece to be big enough that it will stretch over the entire cake. So as I'm rolling it out, I'm also pulling my rolling pin back and forth across the whole length. That's getting rid of any ridges in the sugar paste, and it's making sure the whole thing's even. And then I go over with an acupuncture needle and pop any little air bubbles in the paste. So as I said, I do want to cover this in one piece. So I've covered the whole cake, as you can see, and now I'm going to cut away the pieces that will be the bow because those are going to be red. So I just need to be careful when I'm cutting this away that I'm not cutting into the cake as I go, which is very easily done when you cut through the sugar paste. You can cut into the cake without realising. So I'm just pulling it here and there to make sure that as I go I'm not taking away anything I don't want to. And basically all I want to do is cut away that whole section where the bow will be and leave the sugar paste that is going to cover the cake for the ears. So I'm just going around, I'm pulling the sugar paste away from the cake to get rid of any creases, and I'm rubbing it against the cake to smooth out any areas and make sure that it's stuck to the cake and it's not going to come away later. Once I'm happy that the sugar paste has stuck all the way around the cake where I want it to, I'm using the back of my knife to cut away the excess around the ears here. And I'm using the back of my knife for two reasons. I don't want to cut into the cake where I've just added all that ganache and cut it away. But the other thing is I don't want to cut into this masonite board. So these boards are great, they're really pretty and you can get lots of different colours, but they are like a sort of vinyl coating over a piece of wood, and if you score into that coating, the oils from your buttercream or your ganache or whatever it is can be absorbed by the coating and it leaves a horrible oil stain look on the boards, and I really want to avoid that. So that's why I've used the back of my knife. I did manage to nick the board, which you might notice towards the end, but yeah, just patience and taking your time and trying to avoid that because it does look really unsightly. So once I've cut away all of the black, I'm just going around with my Dresden tool and I'm smoothing down any raggy areas of the black sugar paste before I add in the red. And I'm also going to carve some more detail into the ganache on the bow before I put the red sugar paste over the top of it. Any details that you press into your ganache here will create an area that your sugar paste can be pressed into and moulded more, just to give even more detail for the finished look. So I've got the brand The Sugar Paste red, and I'm just warming that up with my hands before I roll it out, and that will prevent any cracking. And then I'm just going to roll it out again, a nice thick piece, nothing too thin that it's going to tear, and I want to cover the whole thing in one piece yet again. Just anything you can do to make your life easier at this stage. There's no point in doing it in three pieces if you can do it in one, and press in with your modelling tools. So again, a little bit of water on the ganache to give the sugar paste something to stick to, and then I just drape the sugar paste over the top and gently mould it over all of those little areas that I've just created with the modelling tool, and then rub over the top of the bow to make the sugar paste stick down where you want it to stick. No creases, no tears, make sure everything's stuck down, and rub over those areas that you created earlier to really bring them out. So once I'm happy that the sugar paste is all stuck on, I'm just rubbing over with my pinkies into those grooves to make those details pop. It looks so much better, like just a little bit of indentation with the modelling tool and then rubbing over with your pinky into those areas. It makes a massive difference to how that bowl looks. It's so much more detailed and realistic. You've got all those little creases there, where if you hadn't put that detail in, it would have looked very boxy and very flat, and honestly, in my opinion, it just makes all the difference. So anyway, now that we've got the sugar paste in place and I'm happy with all the detail, I'm just going around it with my knife and I'm cutting away all of the excess. And then once again, I'm going to go around with my modelling tool and I'm just going to push in and fix the red sugar paste against the cake, but also I want to make sure that the join between the bow and the ears is smooth. I don't want any areas where they're overlapping. I want it to look very much like the bow is tucked under itself, if that makes sense. If you've got bits of so yeah, just again a little bit more time and patience, just tucking under those little areas, making sure that the joins are all nice and neat. And you want to make sure as well there's no ganache showing through there, because any areas where the sugar paste is not covering it is going to leave it susceptible to drying out. So you want to make sure everything is properly covered. So I'm quite happy with that now. And I'm going round once again with my modelling tool and I'm just going to sharpen up all those details. So we pushed the sugar paste in with our fingers earlier, but that creates a soft blend. So now I'm going to use the veiner side of my modelling tool and I'm going to give it a much sharper detail. So either side of the centre part of that bow, if I push that in, then it makes it look a lot more realistic, and I want it to look like one piece of fabric is coming from the back and looping around the front and under itself, which is what it would be doing if it was a real bow. And then again, I'm using my pinky here just to create more detail in that centre piece. Once I'm happy with all the details, I'll just give it a last final smooth over, make sure I'm quite happy before I move on to the headband piece. So this is just going to be sugar paste. I'm just rolling out a big long piece of black sugar paste. I keep going back and forward against the cake because I want to make sure the length is right. I want it to come round and be sort of like a circle because that's what makes it look like a headband. And I want it to be reasonably thin and flat because that's what's going to give it the ability to sit up on its own. So it will look like a headband and it's not going to fall over. So I'm rolling it out a little bit with my rolling pin, but I'm not making it too thin or it will fall over. And then once I've got it as flat as I would like it, I'm just pushing it back and forward, side to side, against the work surface here, just to flatten out the area that's going to sit up on the board. Because the flatter that is, the more square that is, the easier it will be for it to just sit on its own without worrying about it just flopping over. So once I've got the general shape that I want and the length that I want, I'm putting it against the cake and I'm cutting it at an angle that will make it look as though the piece of paste is coming straight out of the cake, again making it look a little bit more realistic. So I've just used a pastry brush there to add a little bit of water. Water is always good for blending away any seams with sugar paste. So if you add a little bit of water to some fresh sugar paste and just run over it with your thumb, a lot of the time you can get rid of the seam. So that's what I've done there. And now I'm just repeating the exact same process on the other side, rolling it out, getting the right length, making the edges of it nice and square so that it sits up on the board, and then I'll cut it at an angle so that it comes out on the left hand side. I'm using a really sharp knife to cut this and I'm actually doing a sort of sawing action because I'm worried that if I push too hard on it while the sugar paste is still quite soft, that it will squash it down, and then it won't look as realistic, because you need the piece to be as high as the ears are coming up. Otherwise, that band will look a lot more puny in comparison, and it won't look right. The sizes and the ratio will be off. So once I've got those added, they're secured with water, they're stuck on, blended away the seams, I'm just cutting at an angle the bottom part. That would be the part that you would wear on your head. And I'm quite happy with the headband piece. Now I'm just going to go back and add the final details to the bow to make it really look like Minnie Mouse's bow. So I've got some black rainbow dust, edible dust here, and I'm just going to create all the shadows. And again, this is going to make it look realistic, because if you had pieces of fabric that were folded over on themselves, they would create a darker shadow. So I've got a little Wilton brush here, I've got a piece of kitchen towel, and the dust is on the towel, and I'm just going back and forth with it, because the last thing I want to do after all this work is put too much black dust on it and make a bit of a mess. So just sparingly, a little bit of the dust in all the areas where I want to create a shadow. And I'm just gently brushing back and forth, building up the shadows in the middle where the fabric will fold, and then out on either side of the bow in the middle pieces where it rounds. It's like a little triangle that you're creating that shadow on, and it just creates more of a curve, and makes it look more cartoon-like as well. So I'm quite happy with the shadows now. I've got a piece of white sugar paste which I've rolled out, and I'm just using a little circle cutter, a little push circle cutter, and I've just popped out about 14 or 15 white circles. I was just using that photo that I showed at the beginning of the video as my reference, and I was pretty much just putting the spots where I saw them on the photo, but you could put them wherever you like. But it's important when you're putting them on to make the dots mould around the shape that's already there. Otherwise, again, it will look less realistic. So, for instance, that one on the right hand side in the centre, I used my the side of my hand to push that in as it was going round to make it follow the curve. And this one that I'm putting on now, I've cut that in half, and I'm pushing it into where that fold is, because the idea is the other half of that circle is tucked away under the fold of the fabric. So I'm just carrying on, finishing off, putting all the dots on both sides of the bows, and I'm just fixing these with a little bit of water, and I'm putting a little bit of pressure from my thumb, and that spreads the circle out and makes it a little bit bigger as well. Now I've got all of Minnie's dots in place, we are almost finished. I'm just going to go back to that centre part of the bow, and I'm going to add a little bit more of the red sugar paste. And basically what I'm doing is just building up little pieces that look like fabric folds. And I mean, you don't need to do this. The shadows would probably be enough. But I just thought it might be nice to see how it looked, to see if it would look a little bit more realistic, like the fabric was folded over like a real bow, and if we could blend it out into the rest of the bow. So it's really easy to do that. I'm just taking little small amounts of the red sugar paste, and I'm rolling it into a little sausage, and it just starts at the edge of that centerpiece. I'm using water to stick it on to the existing sugar paste, and I'm smoothing over it with my thumb so that it's not got any bumps. I'm going to fold it into the centre so that you don't see where it begins, and then I'm going to use the flat side, the sort of smooth side of my Dresden tool, and that's what's going to help it to blend into the rest of the sugar paste. So once it's nice and smooth and it's fixed on the paste, the smooth side can be blended by cutting off the excess and then just pushing it into the sugar paste that's already on there, gently, so that we're not creating any more creases. And with the heat of your hands on your thumb, you can blend it more so that the seams are almost gone. So yeah, I'm just doing that on both sides, and I'm adding pieces on either side of the shadows that I've created earlier, and hopefully that just brings out the detail that a little bit more. And that's pretty much it. The cake is pretty much done. I'm hoping that this video was useful for you, and if you enjoyed it, then please don't forget to subscribe and click the notifications so that you know when I upload my next video.